Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I'm here for my LPL week number 6 overview and analysis video in the spring split. You know, it's really getting fun starting to cover the LPL. These games are getting more and more hectic by the day. You know, we kind of had some slower games, I would say, at the start of the year. Things were not quite as exciting, at least for me personally, in the LPL, because teams just weren't playing particularly well. We were seeing a lot of bad plays. A lot of teams were underperforming. It's not as much happening anymore. We're actually getting a much stronger middle of the pack, I would say, in the LPL than we've had for most of this year. And that's just exciting, I think, for the league as a whole, to know that there are genuinely 9 teams that I can be excited about being potential playoff teams and feeling good about them. That's a really big positive for the league that I don't think they've had this year so far. So a lot of good happening there, but would love to know you guys' thoughts on everything going on, of course, down in the comment section below. Who do you think's doing well? Who do you think's not doing well? Would love to know your thoughts on whatever, you know, you think is the most important thing of talking about in the LPL right now. But of course, if you want to know how I've, you know, kind of thought about everything so far this year, weeks 1 to 5, you know, the preseason, all that kind of stuff, you can check out the LPL playlist up in the iCard. That's going to have every single weekly recap if you haven't seen it. I am going to be referencing my opinions at least a little bit, and so you won't be too lost, obviously, if you haven't seen it, but I recommend checking it out. But without further ado, let's jump right into the analysis. I don't want to waste you guys' time too much at the beginning of the video. If you are new here, what we do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series that we cover. At the end of the week, I'll be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. And of course, we will also be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 17 after 6 weeks of action. Like I said, we're really kind of coming up towards the end of the spring split. We're in March. We're getting towards playoffs, and so every series matters, and that definitely kicks off with day number 1. It was a really big win for a team that I think really wanted to see themselves come out and dominate. It was LGD Gaming taking on Top Esports, and TES is going to pick up a strong 2-0 win. Very, very good stuff from them, obviously. They fell last week to FPX, the team that was surging at essentially just the right time. A very crazy week for FPX in general, but TES with a really nice bounce back here to kind of get themselves back on track. I think this was a really kind of telling series for maybe how they were going to play a lot of the rest of the split. This bot lane has been really good this year, almost quietly good, because I feel like there have been a lot of other parts, not only of this team, but just in the LPL that have gained a lot of attention. But Mako has been phenomenal. He's going to get player of the series here in this one. He was really, really good on the engagers. Nautilus, Alistair taking over both games by just being aggressive, you know, creating plays, being this big playmaker that we know Mako can be at his absolute best. And it's not like you don't have an AD carry on this team that's going to capitalize on that. It's funny, I was so high on Jackie Love last year. He was my summer split MVP in the LPL over Scout. I thought he was more important to his individual team success than Scout was last year in summer. And, you know, you look at what he's done this year, and it's honestly been less of a, I would say, eye-catching performance from Jackie Love, if only because last year he was so dominant and so much of a star in his own team that was kind of struggling, that this year everything else is kind of going right around him. 369 is winning in the top side. Tion's been really good in the jungle. Mako has kind of been more of a playmaking star, I would say, in the bot lane. The Jackie Love's just been this under the radar, very good ADC, but it's not to take anything away from his talent. I think that he is playing just as well as he did last year. I just think the circumstance is different. He now has a really good support. He now has a top side that is constantly winning. He now has a jungler that is unlocked because of these lanes, and TES is very scary because of it. But Jackie Love, I think, has been awesome. Him and Mako have formed a deadly bot lane duo, one of the best in the entire league. They're right up there with the top 2 teams, with Ruler and Missing, you know, with Elk and On. I think they're right there with both of those bot lanes in terms of how they performed, whether that's on, you know, lane bullies or on late game hyperscalers. It feels like they can do either, and that's really important for TES to be a bit more versatile. But it was everyone. Tion had another very good series. He's been very good all of this year. I know people tend to hate on LPL junglers of Tion's kind of style a bit more often. You look at people like Tion, you look at players like Karsa, you look at players like even someone like a Tarzan, right? They all fall into that category of being a little bit more scapegoaty because of the way they play the game, but I think Tion has been awesome this split. 369 has been one of the best, if not the best top laner in the LPL, and Kareem, I think, has really solidified his spot on this team over the course of the last few weeks. It was looking a little dicey at the beginning of the year when he first joined, but he's actually been really good, I would say, especially in the last 3 weeks. You know, really ever since he came back from Lunar New Year. Meteor. I think this has been a really good kind of showing from Cream, and that was really the only holdout for me that TES could be a top team. They've been number 3 in my power rankings since the beginning of the split. They have not moved, and there's really no reason to move them after a performance like this. And then for LGD, not a great series for a team that has looked relatively competitive, but it could look worse. There were good moments. Bertle actually looked okay in this series going into someone like 369. He was able to generate some lane leads, which I thought was pretty impressive, because 369 is obviously a very good laner. Bertle, another player that gets a pretty bad rap, I would say, online in comparison to his actual skill level, which is a decent top laner. He's not a great top laner, but he's good. He's a solid starter. I think it was the rest of the team that kind of let them down, though. I kind of juggled between Meteor and Jinzhao to give dud of the series to. I landed on Jinzhao here in the support position. The Rakan, the Rel, they just were not nearly as good as the counterparts on the other side, and I thought that was a really noticeable thing for LGD. They lacked a lot of creation. They lacked a lot of playmaking tools. You can blame Meteor for that because he was really passive in this series, and honestly, Meteor has not been nearly as good as he was last year. I think this LGD team is better than they were in 2023, and I think Meteor has taken a step back. I think Haichao has obviously gotten better. Bertle, I think, has really improved this team, but you know, Meteor, I think, has really not been that guy that everybody was hoping he would continue to be in 2024. Obviously, there was reason to believe that this was a natural regression. You know, I kind of talked about that in the preseason, where his champion pool isn't exactly the widest in the world. Definitely more of a carry player, wants to be on the marksman, wants to be on something that gathers a lot of resources, is a bit more resource heavy, and when you're not playing that style, it's not going to be as effective. And also, when you're playing Tian and you play Kindred, you have to play well, and unfortunately, Meteor just wasn't able to live up to that. But Jinzhao was also really bad. Again, if you have a Nautilus or an Alistair in these games, creating plays, opening up opportunities for a Smolder in particular to get super far ahead, and you're not able to do the same on your creating playmaker, it just becomes a massive problem. Jinzhao continues to be the player that is good for 1 or 2 games every single split, really good for 1 or 2 games, and is really bad for the other like 50 to 60 games that they're going to play. It's just not particularly consistent or good, you know, winning League of Legends, if you will. Overall, LGD's fine. Again, they're probably better than the worst teams in the league. They certainly look more competitive, but they're not a team that I think is going to make playoffs, and their record indicates that. And then for top, this is a top 3 team so long as they don't bottle it. Again, it really is just up to the top esports curse. So long as they can overperform what this org is known for doing, which is underperforming, they should be fine. They should be one of the best teams in the LPL, and right now, in my opinion, they still are showing that. And then moving on to our second series of day number 1 here, and it's a top 4 clash, in my opinion, which is crazy to say between these two teams, but Team WE taking on Bilibili Gaming, and BLG does get the job done. They're going to win this 2-0, although both games were relatively close. There were moments in both games that kept things interesting, but WE just didn't have enough firepower to get over Bilibili. You gave him Smolder twice in a row, and he dominated in both of those games. I don't think I really have to say too much else outside of that. Player of the series is going to go to Elk in the bot lane. 2 games of Smolder where he was set up in a really good position by his really aggressive support. His bot laner knew that all he had to do was get him ahead, even on these more aggressive carry-oriented picks that Jun wanted to go for in this series, and Elk did get ahead, especially in that game number 2, where it really felt like he snowballed the game super far out of control very quickly. This just was a very good series for Elk, and I will be honest, like, I was not concerned at all. Like, I don't want to say concerned, because you can watch the earlier videos in this series, but he was not playing like himself in the first couple of weeks. It didn't really feel like he was, you know, being a big spotlight, I guess, resource-heavy player in the bot lane for Bilibili. It was On that was stealing a lot of those resources. You know, mid-jungle was really pushing this team forward. Jun and Knight were playing off each other at a really high level. I thought Knight was one of the best players for the first week or 2 of the split, but now Knight has settled into this more, like, supportive role that we were talking about last week. You know, the facilitator, the shove and roamer. We know he can do this. He's done this in the past, even though everybody on Reddit would like to lead you to believe that Knight is only a carry player and is never going to play winning League of Legends. This guy is very good as a secondary carry without resources, and Elk can be that primary guy. And to see this team switch up their playstyle and their resource management so quickly in the season and really continue to be as good as they are, it's scary. It's deadly how good Bilibili have been in that circumstance. Elk has obviously been fantastic, but you do have to give credit to the team as a whole, because it is all of them. You can't make this kind of transition or this difficult idea of switching up styles work if you're not committed to it, if you're not committed to making that situation better, if everybody's not willing to take a back seat at least once in a while. Knight has been very willing to do that. Jun has been very willing to do that. Bin has been willing to do that. He's not been very good at doing that, playing on weak side, but he's willing to. And then Elk has obviously done it a lot in the past as well. So it's really nice to see the carries just kind of disperse the love, if you will, disperse the resources, but Elka has truly been amazing, I would say, for Bilibili, one of the best AD carries in the league at the current moment. Of course, On is a big part of that as well. You can't be a super fed Smolder if your support isn't going in and creating those plays and creating a lot of that action for you. So, credit to this bot lane. They continue to play well. Bin, Jun, and Knight were all fantastic, and Bilibili continues to look, I don't want to say unstoppable, but like the best team in the LPL. They ran over WE. Those games were close, but they were never in doubt because of just the inevitability that this team carries with them, and that's a very scary thing to run into. But for WE, I moved them up to number 4 in my power rankings almost begrudgingly last week, because who the hell else am I going to put there? Like, Ninjas and Pyjamas fell out of there by their play, and, people maybe want FPX there, but, like, let's chill out and let's see them do it for 2 or 3 weeks in a row before we just crown them after one really good week. Weibo's not been consistent. LNG has obviously fallen out of it. Like, what? OMG, Invictus Gaming? Like, who are the top 4 teams? I felt good about WE, I should say, moving into that top 4 spot, mostly because Wayward has been one of the most productive players in the league. Very funny that you can still go to Reddit and see posts that are talking about how, WE might be a good team. Their upside is Fofo and Awandi, but I don't know about the rest of them. It's almost like people don't watch the games at all. And, I hope to kind of illuminate that through this series. Wayward's been amazing, and he was really good in game 1, but he had his first bad game of the year in game number 2. I'll give that to him. Bin was really good in game 2, and Gragas just didn't show up, and so you got to live with that, but that was probably his first bad game of the year in game like 25 or 26. You'll live with that, considering he's won you, 5 of your 6 series across this year so far, something ridiculous. But unfortunately, Dead of the Series is going to go to Stay. I've actually been really enjoying what I've been seeing from Stay in the LPL so far. I like Prince, but Stay clearly has better chemistry with Awandi, in particular in the bot lane, in terms of the isolated 2v2, and I think he is really mechanically talented, and so I've been very interested to see what he's able to do at this level. This just wasn't his series. He had to play against a fed Smolder twice, and he never really was going to be able to get online. Difficult game to play out, but I'm not going to pin it on him too much. Awandi wasn't great. He had a couple of really good engages, and I think Fofo had 2 good games of Hwei. In particular, I thought he made game number 2 pretty close in terms of the plays that he was making. I think Fofo has continued to be very consistent and very solid all year, just as he was last year, even though he was the scapegoat of that EDG team. But outside of that, I think that WE is just a solid team. The fact that they kept up and actually made BLG sweat a bit in a series like this, I think is more of a positive to WE than it is a negative to Bilibili. I think if you ban out the Smolder in game 2, perhaps this series actually goes a different way. I'm not saying that that's entirely going to happen, because obviously the talent level on Bilibili means you can play through anybody. You still have a Jun on a Kindred, right? Or Knight on a Nico who can insta-win a game, but, credit to WE for hanging in there and keeping things interesting. But really nice win for Bilibili. They moved to 9-1. For now, this is still the best team in the LPL. They feel very consistent, and I think the upside of their talent is scary. Like I said earlier, the fact that they're able to just kind of switch up their style on a game-to-game basis, really kind of putting priority in any lane, not really having one way that they want to play the game that ends up enabling their players in the best way. That's what makes them one of the scariest teams, if not the scariest team in the world. This is a very dangerous collection of 5, and they continue to show that here in the regular season. And then moving on now to day number 2, our second day of LPL action here in week number 6, and it's a battle of the black and white teams. LGD Gaming taking on Invictus Gaming. And IG is going to pick up that 2-1 series win. EDG was able to eke out a game 1 win because Ale continues to be really good. And honestly, this whole team has been playing a lot better, I think, ever since they settled into this 5. Obviously, now we know that Jeje has been injured. He's been in the hospital. This has not been, a decision that they probably would have made to put Monkey in. But ironically enough, I think it's actually helped this team find some cohesion, if only because I think all of them are kind of in this situation together. Outside of Ale, of course, who's just straight up winning them games on his own. But Monkey, Fisher, the Snake, Vampire, they're all players that I think are trying to find their footing as a unit and as individual players as well. And I think, that kind of cohesion has helped them. But Invictus is just too good of a team to be able to take down when you're still trying to find those pieces, especially when you leave Smolder up for 2 games in a row. I've not really been complaining about Smolder because I don't think he's broken. I don't think that he's some sort of, abuse this kind of champ. But in the LPL, his style definitely gets a little bit more exacerbated. It's a lot stronger in the LPL because of the way they end up playing the game, and specifically because this league in general has really gravitated even more than like the regular meta towards enchanters and, less prevalent carries in the mid lane. Things like Talia, things like Ahri, as we saw from Invictus in this series. And I think that's just going to help out Smolder in a lot of ways as well. On is going to get player of the series. Those 2 Smolder games were both dominant, and On looks really good on this champion. We've kind of been talking about how this bot lane has not really clicked in the same way that they did in spring of last year ever since the end of that spring run. And really it was ever since they, went on that losing streak streak at the end of spring to miss playoffs. It really hasn't felt like this bot lane is kind of, locked in and clicked in the top, 5-ish way that they were playing at that time. They've just kind of been good and not great. They're kind of slowly creeping back up in my eyes to being one of the more interesting bot lanes in the LPL, especially because I think this team is playing significantly better since Leon came in. I think the aggressiveness is up, even if Leon's individual mechanics have gone down since like the first week he came in. I think his impact on the team in terms of the shot calling and the decision making over the course of, the beginning parts of these games has been very noticeable. This team plays very different now that Leon is in. I think it's helped them a lot. Obviously, the solo laners have been very good this split. I think in general, Cryan has been a focal point, but again, with the meta moving towards bot lane being more of a power lane and something that you want to play for with hyper carries like Smolder, if you are going to get that opportunity, having things like Karma and Ahri in your back pocket is certainly not going to hurt for Invictus. But if On and Wink are going to continue to be power points of the map, like they were last year, On in particular being such a good AD carry, and Wink, I thought even took a step up in summer. It just wasn't followed up by the bot lane actually succeeding. It was more him making plays around the map. I think there's reason to believe that this could get better for Invictus as the year continues to go on, because You Should Know Me is getting better every single game. Cryan, I think, is in a really good spot right now, and Leon is definitely adding a good bit of, intrigue, I would say, to these games for IG. This is a good team. It's really hard to place them because the middle of the pack is so interesting in the LPL right now. You've got so many teams that are fighting it out for basically like number 4 to number 11 in the LPL that, it's really hard to kind of place those teams, but IG's making a case to be a top 5-ish team, maybe even top 4 if things continue to go really right. Their schedule doesn't get particularly easy down the stretch, but this is a really good start to the year for them. And then for EDG, like I said, they're starting to build some of that cohesion, starting to build some of that unity. I think they have looked better with this unit. Monkey, as much as I have praised him here, is going to get done to the series, mostly for that Lee Sin game in Game 2, which was just horrendous. I mean, he did not play Lee Sin well at all. It didn't feel like he was comfortable on the champion. I don't really know. I mean, obviously, if you're picking Lee Sin in Pro, I imagine you've played him before, but this was a really weird game from Monkey, and I wouldn't expect him to pull that one out again. I thought he was better the rest of the series, especially in Game 1, but really bad in Game 2, and honestly, Ale was the biggest problem in Game number 3, but he solo won Game 1 with some of those Poppy engages, and he's been the best player on this team for most of the year. It's hard for me to criticize him for being too aggressive on a champion that just isn't all that strong right now. In Jax, especially into something like Cassante, after the nerfs, I don't think Jax is really in a position to be able to fight him nearly as easily. I think the rest of the team is playing better, though, well, with the exception of Vampire, who continues to just not really find good engages. He had that one series, and everybody's like, he's finally found it. He's a great LPL support. This guy had one good series. Let's not jump the shark. Let's not, run over the plot here. The Nautilus games were not good, especially down the stretch of the series. If you're going to play Sana Nautilus, that support needs to be aggressive, and they need to be able to make plays, and you need to be ahead in the game, and it just didn't happen. Vampire was not playing well, but Fisher and the Snake, I think, are playing better. The Snake in particular, I think, has had a good couple of weeks, but EDG's just not going to be a good team this year. I've accepted that. I think a lot of EDG fans have accepted that. They're going to have interesting moments, and it's nice to see them not get obliterated in a series against potentially a top, 5 to 7 team in the league, but, winning is probably a little bit out of their wheelhouse in this one. But for IG, it's a nice win. Bot lane's looking good. Cryan was awesome at the beginning of the split. Leon, I think, has reinvigorated them. IG's an interesting team. Hopefully they're going to keep up this momentum for the rest of the split. And then moving on to our second series of day number 2, a battle of 2 and 7 teams that both are kind of underperforming expectations. RNG taking on ThunderTalk Gaming, and ThunderTalk picks up the 2-0 series win here, and this isn't particularly surprising to me. I would have expected this outcome to perhaps go a little bit differently, even if ThunderTalk was able to take it. But this just shows where RNG is at, if we're being entirely honest right now, which is in a really, really bad state. They are not playing good League of Legends. This is one of the worst teams in the league. They're making their way down into, like, the Ultra Prime, Edward Gaming, Rare Atom tier of teams, like, bottom of the barrel, like, not even close to playoff level of teams. Teams like ThunderTalk seem significantly better. ThunderTalk was significantly better in this series, and that's a scary thought, because this team has not been good this year. It's funny. This was kind of a battle between the two players that I've given the most dud of the series to over the course of this year, with Beishwan on ThunderTalk and LWX on RNG. And unfortunately for LWX, Beishwan actually had a pretty good series here, and that means that ThunderTalk ends up coming out on top. But jokes aside, 1xN is going to get player of the series. He's actually very quietly at a bad split. Like, he has not been good. The mechanics have really kind of regressed a lot from last year. It reminds me a lot of the development that Assume had over the course of the first couple of splits that he played, where he was, pretty interesting. Definitely a player that was getting hyped up on LGD, but I was always a little bit more I guess, cautious about hyping him up as much as some other analysts were at the time. He was having okay games, but I didn't think the individual, things that he was showing off were all that replicable as you move to different circumstances, and lo and behold, obviously, it didn't hold up. I was saying very similar things about 1xN, although I thought 1xN was a better player last year, and he has not been good. He's been really just nothing for this team as the rest of it crumbles around them. Chocho's had a couple of good games, too. It's not like he's not had a support. For the most part, Yucal and Chocho are the only two players on this team actually doing anything at any given time, but 1xN actually had a really good series here. Lo and behold, getting Smolder and getting Superfed will give you some confidence, but it was more the Varus game in Game 2 that actually caught my eye and really was impressive. The mechanics were more so there. Yucal obviously did a lot to help out on that on the Talia, but, it really was 1xN that was carrying this series in terms of damage, so big credit to him. Yucal continued to be really good. This guy is just so good and does not deserve to be on a team that is outside of the playoffs again. Anybody who knows the channel knows I absolutely loathe the term elo hell in pro. I think it is just unearned in most circumstances, especially in the way that the community ends up using it. But if there was ever a pro player that was an elo hell, it's absolutely Yucal, who's really freaking good on this Thunder Talk team, and they just don't have the talent to be able to enable him. But Chocho's been okay for this team as well. I don't think he's had any sort of like star-making games, but I think from a moment-to-moment basis, he's not making egregious errors, which is kind of the norm for the bottom-tier LPL teams. It's the norm for RNG and for Ming on the other side of this matchup, and so you can like that, but topside has been awful. It's really good to see them actually have a good series. Yes, it's against one of the most checked out top sides I've ever seen in my entire life, but at least they ended up doing it, so credit to Thunder Talk. I think Yucal's really good. I think Chocho's been pretty solid, and 1xN has potential. I don't know if it's going to come together. This still feels like a team that's kind of got to prove a lot before I believe they're going to be anywhere near the playoffs, but at least they showed something in this series. And then for RNG on the other side, what else is there to say? This team has given up. Like, that is exactly what we are watching. We're seeing a team that, the bot side of this map is not clicking and they're not adapting to the meta all that well, and the top side has checked out, like, entirely. Breathe and Wei are not there. Now, Wei's been playing bad for about a year and a half at this point, in my opinion. Maybe not bad, but under the expectation that you would have for his name for about a year and a half. He's just kind of not been that superstar jungler ever since the beginning of 2023, but Breathe was, like, the only player playing well on this team at the start of the split when they were 2-1, and now that they're 2-8, it is clear that he gave up. Like, he gave up last week. He didn't play at all last week. He gave up this week. Hoya is like the worst top laner in the LPL, and he was still doming Breathe in lane. I just don't even think they're trying anymore. It's really sad. LWX is going to get dead of the series because he continues to walk into really bad situations, into really bad circumstances, and get himself blown up in fights that he has absolutely no business having that happen in. It's just ridiculous. Again, I was an LWX hater. I got a lot of hate for it, but even I could never have predicted him being this garbage for RNG. Even I thought he'd be a top 11 or 12. I think I had him at 12 in terms of my preseason AD carry power rankings. Even I thought he'd be somewhere around 12. This guy's number 17. It's ridiculous how bad he has been in the LPL. Ming is certainly not helping it, by the way. I don't know if it's the meta. At the beginning, I said it was because he was playing Ashe every game, and he's so bad at Ashe. He clearly was not a marksman support player, but it feels like his confidence is drained, and now, even when he is playing stuff that he plays like a Mumu, he's playing it really poorly. It's just, I don't know what to say. Tong Yuan is not good. He's one of the worst mid laners in the league, and the development that we saw towards the end of Summer Split has not carried over into 2024. It's just all the risks that this team has taken, all of the leaps that they've taken to try and, I guess, moneyball this, get rid of Gala, try to bring in, a different AD carry that's going to be a bit cheaper, but is still going to give you good production, and, let, mid laners walk, let Xiaohu go. It's just not worked. A lot of the changes that they've made have made this team significantly worse, and then the rest of the roster kind of crumbled around it. This is a dead team in the water right now, and it's not really fun to see because RNG are such perennial giants. But for Thunder Talk, this is a necessary win. Obviously, they got to follow this up with something. I can't just take a win over RNG as like gospel and say that they're back, but this was a good showing. 1xN played his best series of the year, and if he can keep that up, that's huge for them because I trust Yucal and I trust Chocho. If you have a strong bot side, I don't really care how bad your top side is. You can probably do something with that, and so there's definitely still interesting pieces here for TT. I just don't know how much I can trust that they're going to continue that because it's only RNG here in this series. And then moving on now to, I guess, day number 3. We didn't have any Wednesday games. Very strange for the LPL to just skip a day in the middle of the week, but I guess moving on to our third of 6 days in this LPL week number 6. It's a matchup between Anyone's Legend and Rare Adam, where shockingly, Rare Adam is actually going to be able to pick up the victory in this one. I did not see this coming. Even though I am lower on AL, I have had them around 9 or 10, just kind of barely in the playoffs. For most of this split, it's been really hard to commit to this team because as much as I like Shen Shanks and Kale for the most part. The pieces around them have not been consistent really at all, and this is a fraudulent record. That I think is abundantly clear. That's not really a hot take. I'm not like spewing anything that's different here. I think a lot of people have been sitting here and talking about teams like Ninjas in Pyjamas and Weibo Gaming as fraudulent. You know, there is truth to that. They are not probably as good as their records would entail because of their schedules, but the true fraudulent team in the LPL right now to me is AL, and I think that was proven in this series. And for RA, it's a nice win. I mean, this is the worst team in the league last week. They lost to EDG, and that's not good. I know they've won a couple of series, but they really have not looked all that consistent, and they were able to generate consistent leads in this series. This was well played from them, and AL had no answers. They had some really bad positioning mistakes. These games were close, and RA just kind of outplayed them, and that's really not the thing that you want to see from a team that really is expecting to make playoffs, and honestly, with their record, probably will make playoffs. So let's go ahead and talk about it. For RA, player of the series is going to go to Assume. You know, I've kind of trash-talked Assume a lot, not only in this video, but over the course of his career. I've just never really seen the hype, even on LGD back in the day when, you know, he was getting all this talk about, you know, he was coming in and that team was awful and he was like a spark of life. It really did feel like he was being overhyped because everybody else in that team was garbage and there really was nothing to play through, and so people were just excited about anything on that team that could be relatively interesting, and Assume kind of was interesting, but you know, I also have talked about this in the past. I think LPL fans are very, like, willing to throw around the next big AD carry moniker. Like, oh, this person's gonna be the next big AD carry. They love doing that to every single young AD carry that comes through the system. Assume kind of got that treatment as well. I've just never seen it, but this was really good. Like, this is, first of all, easily the best series he's played all year long. That's not even close. This might even be better than anything he did last year for this team as well, and so, you know, that's really good to see. I mean, he was given a lot of resources. Credit to Nayu. He won really hard in the jungle matchup. Get him on something that can be more aggressive, like the Xin Zhao or the Graves, and, you know, you can do something on that, but really, this was Assume getting the resources and actually being able to win the game off of that. Varus, Kai'Sa, it didn't really matter. He could play both styles, and he played them both very well. This was an intriguing series, something that I'm definitely interested to see more of. But like I said, Nayu was also very good, definitely the better of these two junglers. Krako is a very interesting, you know, player. We've talked about him in previous weeks. He's just been so hit or miss for this team. He's been better than he was last year for DRX because he's had a lot of games that he's just straight up won for AL, but also in that style, he's had a lot of games that he's just straight up lost. It feels like the consistency that he's had is gone, and Nayu took advantage of that very well. You know, I was so high on Nayu going into the year. I thought he was going to have the split that Milky Way is having at the current moment. Didn't end up happening that way, but you know, there is still a lot to like about him as a player and as a prospect. I'm not going to completely throw it out just because this team has been disastrous at the beginning of the year. He still has room to grow, and this is good sign. This is a good sign that I think that could happen. Xiaoshu was the better top laner. That hasn't been very consistent throughout this year. Xiaoshu's actually been very bad on the top side, which I think is disappointing considering how good his 2023 was, but he was the better Riki last year out of these two top laners. He was again in this series. Vikla was really solid on Hui. Vikla has very quietly been pretty good, I would say, over the past 3 weeks. You know, he was miserable at the start of the year, but I think he's settled in and gotten a lot more comfortable in the situation, and Zora was fine here. Didn't really have to do a whole ton, but credit to Assume. I really do think that he was kind of the difference maker, and Nayu as well, who I think were the two big forces for RA in this series. But for AL on the other side, man, like, I just wish that I could get a grasp on this team. I wish that for one split, this org didn't just underperform its talent level, but it just feels like it's cursed. It doesn't feel like it matters who's playing for AL. It feels like they're always going to get fans and, you know, critics' expectations and hopes up and just dash them. And hope is a very apropos word in this series because he's going to get my dud of the series. Perhaps you could give this to someone else. Maybe Harry in the top lane who wasn't particularly effective. Krako wasn't good in the jungle, but I thought Hope's positioning was so bad on Smolder in the last 2 games that I simply had to give it to him. You know, we've seen that champion dominate. It's not some free win champion, as I talked about earlier this week. It does take a bit of skill to execute on, and Hope did not have that skill. He was a lot worse than his scoreline would entail in this one. His positioning was just way too aggressive. He was never really in positions to play safe alongside the Smolder, which is exactly what you need to do. Like, you need to really kind of allow that champion to get to its power spike. You can't just assume it's going to dominate the game from moment one, and I just don't think Hope played well at all in the back half here. I actually think they had a chance to win if it weren't for that. Shanks also wasn't very good. He's been very rock solid, very consistent. Honestly, I don't want to say underrated, but pretty solidly rated across this split. He has been their best player, and, you know, he was kind of a letdown here. Vikla was the better mid laner, and so, you know, it's just going to be a hard series to win when your best players, your most consistent carries aren't performing, but that is a real concern, is that they weren't performing, is that this was not a good performance from them. You need to get something consistent out of these, you know, carries, out of these players, because you're nothing without Shanks at the moment. Like, Krako's not consistent. He'll win you games, but he's not going to get you anywhere far in the LPL if he's playing the way that he is now. I love Kale, but it's not like he's like a difference maker in the support position right now, especially with how the rest of the team is playing. Harry is not a good top laner, and Hope is not consistent at all in the AD carry role, and he's really not a carry, like a hyper carry anyways. That's never really been what he has been at the LPL level. It's up to Shanks, and so when he loses in a series like this, when he's not particularly effective, it does affect the team pretty heavily, and I think we saw that here. But for RA, like, this is a nice win. Like, how much does it mean? They're actually at 3-7. That's a better record than a lot of the other teams that are around them in the standings. Considering they were the last team to get a win in the LPL, that's pretty nice. It's really not a bad thing, but I really don't think it's going to mean all that much. I still think this team has a lot of room to grow, but if they continue to put these performances together like this, like, they're not going to be in the bottom two like they've been pretty unanimously for the whole split up until this point. And then moving on to our second game of day number 3 here, and it's a top team, bottom team clash that went as expected. JD Gaming taking on Ultra Prime, and JDG picking up the 2-0 series win, as they absolutely should in this instance. Ultra Prime has been interesting, and they continue to make this series interesting, but not interesting enough to really put down a team like JDG, although there is a roster change, a substitution, if you will, to talk about in this series, that being, of course, Sheer coming in the top lane. As far as I was aware, he was actually the plan all along in the top lane. I don't know if this is going to be a permanent change or if they're going to be just moving them in and out, trying to get Sheer some experience, seeing what they have with him versus Flandre, you know, just getting an idea. But they're in love with this kid. They pulled him out of solo queue and immediately put him into like LPL caliber scrims. He was scrimming with the first team all offseason. Like, he is definitely being groomed to be the heir apparent here in the top lane. Whether or not that's going to be right now or not, I don't know, but he came in this series and was pretty good, especially considering the circumstance. He was mega camped in game number 2 by Hacker. Credit to Hacker. We'll get into him. He played really well in this series, but it just wasn't enough. JDG was better, and Kanavi was a bit better. He's going to get player of the series. Obviously, you could give this to Ruler as well. He played the Smolder in game 2. We've seen how effective that champion can be, and if you want to say him taking over in that second game was the most important game of the series or the best performance of the series, I totally understand, but I thought Kanavi was a bit more consistent across both games, and so he's going to get player of the series for me here. He's been awesome. He's continued to be awesome. It's funny, because Kanavi, this split, has essentially been everything he was last year as well, and nobody's talking about him nearly as much because it's all just so expected at this point. Kanavi is the best jungler in the world, and I don't think anybody is really even debating that at the moment. He's just been so good for the past 2 years in particular, but even going back to like 2020, this guy has been dominant for a long time, has really proven himself to be one of the more elite junglers of all time, and obviously I'm not trying to put him in the top 1 or 2 of those ranks, but, you know, he's pretty high up there at this point. He is one of the most dominant junglers that League has ever seen, and he continues to just win. Whether it's on Jax into Xin Zhao, which is not always the easiest matchup to end up playing out of the jungle, or the Xin Zhao into Lee Sin, with Hacker actually playing really well in game number 2, Kanavi just was able to generate more tempo, even with a lot of tempo going the other way. He did a great job of knowing exactly where to put his resources and getting his carries ahead, most specifically his bot laner, so credit to him. But Ruler was really good as well. It wasn't just Kanavi. Obviously, Ruler had to step up and do a lot. Mostly that Smolder game in game 2, but he was still good on the Kai'Sa in game 1. Smolder just feels really strong in the hands of a broken player on a broken team against a not a suitable competition, I guess you could say. Ultra Prime is not necessarily on the same level as JD Gaming, and so Ruler kind of just got to do whatever he wanted, and he got super fed in the mid game and just was able to take over. So really nice to see Ruler continuing to play well. Big shocker there. Yagao was great in the mid lane. Got to play against Yuukai, who was not on Assassins, which means that he won lane every single game. And Sheer was really solid in the top lane. I know Decade's like the weakest top laner in the league by a ginormous margin at the moment, and I think that that's becoming clear. As much as I dislike Hoya, and as bad as I think Hoya has been, Decade is like the worst and least valuable player in the LPL at the moment. I just don't know what is going on with him, but Sheer did a good job to survive a lot of pressure put onto him on the Udyr in game number 2. For a rookie, being able to absorb so much is really a good sign. So credit to JDG, they looked very good even with a new top laner in there. And then for Ultra Prime on the other side, you know, there are interesting pieces to this team. You know, Yuukai's a very talented player. They're not really showing it off right now because they're putting him on Karma, and I still don't think that's the right idea. I get it that you want to play stuff like Draven, but it's really not the style that got Ultra Prime their wins at the beginning part of the season. I think you're straying away from the good things that this team has done, but Hacker continues to actually look very good on this team. I don't think he's perfect, but he's very good at Lee Sin, and we saw that in game 2. I think this has actually been one of his better splits in a while. It's really interesting. Returning to Ultra Prime, or, you know, E-Star, you know, the former organization that he kind of broke out in the first place, became an LPL regular in the jungle in the first place. He was really good back in the day. I really liked him in his rookie year, and he kind of just fell off. He got worse split after split after split, and, you know, he comes back here, and it seems some of that magic has returned. He has arguably been the single best player on this team, and I don't think I would have expected that going into the year, so credit to him. Decade was really bad, though. Dud of the series, I mean, what else do you want me to say? They even put resources into him in game 2. Hacker got him super fed on the Darius, and he did literally nothing with it. He was so far ahead, and he's so lackluster in terms of his opposition that he just can't do anything with it. I hate to criticize a player as much as I've criticized Decade, but there's only so much I can do at this point. This guy is just not LPL caliber. I don't care who their backup is. I know they have ZS on roster here, Zeus, whatever you want to call him. I know he's a sub on the roster here. I know he hasn't played pro in, what, like 2 years or something, but he's got to be better than Decade. He has to be. It just, even if it's something different, you've got to go in a different direction because it's just not working. It doesn't even really matter what happens with Decade right now. Like, you can give him infinite resources and he's still going to lose. It's really that bad right now for Ultra Prime. But Doggo and Jue were whatever. I think Jue's scoreline looks worse than what it actually was, but Doggo continues to not be all that impressive on champions that require you to be aggressive. It's just not the style that I think this team likes to go to. Put Yuukai and Hacker on the playmakers, put Doggo on the poke mages. Like, that is what has worked for Ultra Prime, and they continue to move away from that. But for JDG, nice win. Again, not particularly shocking, not particularly interesting, not a crazy result or anything like that, but still picking up wins against Ultra Prime. Good. Moving to 8-1, it's good. Kanavi looking great, Ruler looking great, and most importantly to me, Sheer looking so good, I think is very much a positive for JDG overall, and I'm interested to see what happens with this team moving forward. And then moving on to our third series of day number 3, and this one is very interesting to talk about. Some interesting storylines. It's Weibo Gaming taking on Ninjas in Pyjamas, and Weibo Gaming picks up a 2-0 win where they kind of dominate the series. Game 1 had a couple of moments where it was back and forth. You had moments where Shanji was trying to bring them back into the game, but at the end of the day, Weibo was a little bit stronger. Xiaohu on that Karma was basically impossible to deal with. They didn't really have an easy answer towards all of the shields and buffs and even damage that he was putting out in that first game, and so they ended up falling. And then game number 2 was just a disaster from NIP, and now you're kind of starting to get a bit concerned if you're an NIP fan, and I think the reason is because it's not exactly the things that you would expect to be going wrong that are going wrong. Like, if you would have told me NIP was about a 500 team, a little bit above by this part of the year, I'd be like, yeah, that's pretty good, that's fine, you know, that's about where I expected, but not in the way that they've gotten there. But for Weibo, necessary win. This team dropped below 500 at the end of last week. They were on a pretty big losing streak. Them and LNG were kind of neck and neck for that number 10 spot in the playoffs in my eyes, and Weibo, I think, definitely solidifying that they should still be a playoff team no matter how they have played so far this split with this win. Player of the series actually was really up in the air. Whether you want to give this to Crisp or Xiao Hao, I think is really up to your personal preference. Crisp was definitely the one that I think was more like supportive in nature, but Xiao Hao was the carry this game, so he's going to get my player of the series, or at least in game number 1. He got so many resets on that Viego. He was really, really good. Crisp was amazing on the Bard. A lot of flashy plays in that second game, but Xiao Hao was also really good at setting the tempo on the Xin Zhao, and so I want to give him a lot of credit, mostly because he really has not been that star maker for Weibo that I kind of expected him to be so far this year. Obviously, this is one of my guys. This is a channel darling, however you want to say it. I've been on the back of Xiao Hao for like 2 years now. He was an all-pro for me last summer. He was an all-pro for me in 2022 summer as well, which I think a lot of people, you know, maybe don't realize how good he was 2 years ago. Like, he has been at this level for a while, but it's taken him a little bit of time to get settled here in Weibo, and honestly, his lack of pressure in the jungle has hurt them at times, but this was kind of exactly what you're looking to see. It's playing exactly to the strengths of whatever champion you need to pilot in order to enable the best out of the rest of the team. Xiao Hao playing the Viego can get the resets, can take over in team fights, and can be be the carry that way, and then Xiaohao on Xin Zhao can set the tempo early, can skirmish a lot, and really like let Light and Crisp do a lot of the heavy lifting down the stretch on the Zeri and the Bard. It's a really good showcase of just how well-rounded of a player he is, and I really think that a lot of people are going to look at this and be like, oh yeah, this was the Xiaohao we were all expecting coming to Weibo Gaming. But you do got to give a lot of credit to Crisp because that Bard game was very, very clean. It's very interesting talking about Chris because he is both the best and the worst thing on this Weibo gaming team. To me, he's the best player on Weibo, but that's kind of a problem. Like, the fact that he is the best player on this team means that they are naturally just going to be more volatile, because Crisp has been pretty volatile this year. He's been volatile ever since Worlds, really. He was pretty consistent last year, was very good for this Weibo team to qualify them for Worlds in the first place, but Worlds kind of messed with his psyche, I think, and now he's just more aggressive. He's flipping a lot more, and, you know, you have the good moments still, as we saw in Game 2, but you are going to have some more bad moments. I think generally I'm still very high on Crisp. I still think he's one of the best supports in the world, and I don't know how popular of opinion that is anymore. I think Crisp is actually a very, very good player. Light was very good, you know, got a lot of resources in Game 2, it did well with it. Like I said, I thought Xiaohu actually played well for a lot of the series. Maybe not as much on the Ahri in Game 2, but I really liked how he played the Karma in Game 1. I don't think they win that Game 1 without him, and then ZDZ was fine. He actually did a lot in Game number 2. They basically were able to win fights 4v5 without him, and so him being on the TF and just split pushing the entire game was totally fine for how they wanted to play. Overall, like, there's a lot of positives to take away from this for Weibo. I think they played better in this series than they have in a while, and I think specifically Xiaohao stepping up in the jungle was very important for them. But for NIP, like I said earlier, if you would have told me this team was 7-4, you know, going into the second half of the year or right around the playoff time, I'd be like, that's pretty good, you know. Maybe they could have been a bit better, but you know, you can take that. Like, you'll live with that. They're probably going to be a tough out in the playoffs. But if I would have guessed it was because the bot lane wasn't stepping up. That they just needed an elite bot lane and they didn't have it. And so the top side of the map was just getting a little bit screwed. That's not how it's been. Shanji and Aki have really not been all that good this year. And it's really concerning. Shanji in particular is going to get yet another dud of the series. He's gotten quite a few of these in 2024. He was really good in Game 1, which makes it very hard to give him dud of the series. But he was miserable in Game 2. Like, it was the worst game of the series that anyone played. And it was not particularly close. I think you could give this to Rookie, who was also really, really bad today. And, you know, a lot of people are going to make excuses for Rookie, and trust me, I'm a Rookie defender. I was a Rookie defender last year, and I've been a big Rookie fan this year. I think he's been one of the best mid laners in the LPL, full stop. But, you know, this was his worst series of the year. He was not good here, especially on the Hui in Game 2, where he just entered the game away. Like, he was not good. But I think Shanji was worse, and that's why he's going to get dead of the series. If this topside continues to struggle, if the OMG players of Shanji and Aki in particular continue to not really be able to step up and match the pressure that the rest of this team is able to put on, that's a problem. And honestly, it's shocking because it's not like this team didn't face pressure last year. This NIP team is in a very similar position to what OMG was for a lot of last year. And in fact, that's the team I've been comparing NIP to because I think they play almost identically to how OMG played last year. You have a really aggressive mid lane matchup that you then use to spread the wealth, and you just hope top lane wins. That's kind of exactly what OMG was doing in 2023. NIP just isn't able to execute on that because Shanji's losing and Aki doesn't have the same kind of pressure. He was a top 3 jungler in the LPL last year. He's not been anywhere close to that so far in 2024. Real concerns, but somehow, some way, Photic and Zhuo are like the consistent part of this team. I mean, Rookie is the consistent part of this team. He just had a bad series. I'm not going to freak out about that, but you know, if the top side doesn't fix itself, this team is going to be that overrated fraud that every LPL fan loves to just brag about on Twitter. Oh, NIP are frauds, NIP are frauds, NIP are frauds. It's a catchphrase at this point for Reddit. You know, they're starting to prove them right. They need to figure something out in order to get back on the right track, but it's just not working out at the current moment. And then for Weibo, this is an important win. You needed to get this. You know, nobody would have bat an eye, I think, if you lost this, but winning this, I think, is actually really important for your confidence. Hopefully this gives Xiaohao the confidence he needs to kind of keep this momentum going. He's always been somebody who has built up his year a little bit slower. That's what he did last year as well after a great 2022 summer. His 2023 spring was okay, and then his 2023 summer was really good. And so hopefully this is all building into him getting more comfortable in the situation that he's in. But, you know, Weibo's an interesting team, if not a little bit inconsistent. And then moving on now to day number 4. We're over halfway, I guess, through the week in terms of days, but we've still got a lot of games to cover with everything left still being a super day, and we kick off day number 4 with a matchup between LGD Gaming and LNG Esports. Always fun when these two teams go head-to-head, but shockingly, it's LGD picking up a big victory here. This team has looked competitive in basically all of their series, even the ones that they've been losing, and LNG has not looked all that good, but even this is a pretty big upset. I know these two teams are right right next to each other in my power rankings, but rest assured, there is a tier gap in between those two spots. So for LNG to drop this series is a bit of a disaster for them. I'm not going to lie. This is a really nice win for LGD, but this is significantly worse for LNG, who's in the easier part of their split right now. Let's not, get that mixed up. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series. This one is an absolute no-brainer. It's going to go to Bertle. He obliterated LNG. I mean, Zika's an interesting, good player, an all-pro-esque caliber top laner, somebody who's going to be around, the 3rd to 6th best top laner in the LPL, or at least that's what you would imagine. But Bertle made him look like an absolute joke. Really good stuff from him. Both of the Aatrox games were phenomenal. I mean, he really was just able to take over the laning phase and transition that into being, an unkillable Aatrox in the late game. This is the Bertle that I've been going on and on about. This is nothing new. He's had games like this in the past. He was playing like this on Sandbox for a lot of last year, and people just forgot because they, don't watch the regular season, or they do watch the regular season and they only watch summer, et cetera, right? He got worse in the summer. I'm not trying to pretend like Bertle's a perfect player and that he's not on LGD for a reason, but he still has a lot of really good parts, and I do think that he's a very talented player. And it comes out every so often that oh yeah, Bertle was a top prospect in the top lane for a long time for a good reason. These are the games where you're I get it now. The Aatrox games were really dominant from him. Wasn't just the Aatrox though. He was good on the Gnar in game 2 as well, even if the rest of the team didn't necessarily back him up. I thought Haichao was, continued to be really good, I should say, in this series. He was better than Scout, his opposition in the mid lane, which we will talk about. Again, fan perception on this LNG team. It's so funny how fickle LPL fans are. As a little bit of a spoiler for the LNG kind of section later in this, but Haichao was awesome here. Got to play some more aggressive picks like the Tristana, but also some more control picks, obviously like the Talia and the Orianna. Meteor was better, I would say, in this series than he's been recently. Really hasn't been all that consistent, but was actually able to play well on some engagers. Ironically enough, it's the engagers I think he's played better on in 2024. That's the exact opposite of kind of his career trends up until this point, so something to monitor. And Xiaoya and Jinzhao were fine as well, but this was Bertle's series. I mean, through and through, he was the star in this one, and he was the one that was decimating LNG. But let's get into this conversation about LNG because it's so funny. It's going to be very difficult for me to have this conversation because public opinion has swung around into what I was saying for all of last year that I was getting criticized in my comment sections for. And so it's just very weird for me to now be pushing back on that argument, or at least the way that it's being made. Tarzan is somebody who I've defended a lot on this channel. I had defended him a lot last year when he was getting unjustified hate. I remember specifically after that Invictus series when you saw fans berating him outside the game after the performance, and it's just this is ridiculous. There's no way you can watch these games and say that Tarzan is the only problem for LNG, and, lo and behold, he gets replaced by Weiwei, who is a completely different player, and things start going south. But I think the conversation surrounding LNG right now is also super unproductive, and I hate to be the guy who's how could they possibly not have learned from their mistake last year, scapegoating Tarzan, making him the enemy, and then they kicked him off only to learn that he wasn't the problem? How is it possible that fans have yet to learn from that, or Reddit fans? It's not fans, it really isn't. It's just the Reddit armchair analysts. How have they not learned from this in the most obvious one-to-one comparison of ways, now scapegoating Scout and scapegoating Weiwei and saying these players are now garbage instead of trying to take a bigger look at it? And that's kind of what I want to, present on this channel, is a more nuanced discussion about why things are not working for LNG. I know I've gone on this discussion in the past few weeks, but the conversation is still active. The reason people are so sentimental about Tarzan, and the reason Tarzan was able to get the most out of both himself and Scout when they played together, is because of their synergies in terms of playstyle and mentality. They are both not particularly aggressive players, but both can be very active on the map. They're not passive in terms of that. They are interesting in the sense that Tarzan likes to be a facilitator. He likes to be a supportive, kind of jungler. He loves Sejuani. He loves Zac. That's Tarzan, right? He's kind of in that peanut mold of jungler, and Scout really thrives off of that because he's not the most aggressive laner. He's not somebody that's going to try to kill you 1v1. He loves these mid to late game skirmishes that you can get around, nice objective setups and, being able to out macro the enemy team. That's where Scout has always been at his best. But now you plug and put Weiwei in the lineup, and Weiwei's not a worse jungler than Tarzan, even though he's been playing significantly worse than Tarzan was last year. It's just that Weiwei is a super aggressive jungler who wants to generate a lot of leads early and needs a lot of prio to do so. He's in that Kanavi mold. If Tarzan's Peanut you know, Weibo is Kanavi. Obviously, they're not equal in terms of skill, but that kind of mold of player. And Scout's just not the mid laner that's going to be able to facilitate that playstyle. So both of them end up not getting the resources they need, and they both end up looking worse. And that's what happened so far this year. It's not Scout being washed. It's not Scout losing confidence. It's not all of this. It's just these players are not built to get the best out of each other. It's conflicting playstyles, I think is the way I like to put it. But Scout is going to get done of this series, because even if it is just a playstyle difference, I can't ignore the fact that he has been bad. And it does feel like he's starting to try and force issues, which is definitely not his style, but he's not been effective this split. And Weibo has also not been effective this split. I think LNG seriously need to consider some changes to this roster if they want to keep their season alive. Because honestly, with this loss, there is a real possibility that this is not a playoff team. This is not a top 10 team. And that is a disaster for a team that made finals last year. I have to reiterate, they were a top 2 team in the LPL in summer of 2023, and now they're at risk of not making playoffs, only changing one member in the jungle. It's been an absolute disaster, but whatever it is, they've got to figure it out soon. I don't know what the exact solution is, but all I know is that the cohesion of this team is clearly off. You can see it when they play, and scapegoating Scout or scapegoating Weibo, it's not going to fix the problem. It's just going to exacerbate it when you kick Scout and get a worse mid laner. That's exactly what RNG did. Like, that is this is literally the same situation that happened to RNG, and now they're bottom of the standings. LNG might be headed for that course as well if they don't right the ship soon. But for LGD on the other side, this is a nice win. I hate that I talked mostly about LNG here, but LGD really played well, and they're a pretty interesting team right now. I think they are the best of, like, the bad teams in the league. When you look at the teams that are just not going to make playoffs, I think LGD is probably the best of those teams right now, which I would not have said at the beginning of the year, but there is a lot to like about this team, and the solo laners are definitely a big part of that. And then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and it's another really interesting one. It's FPX, FunPlus Phoenix, taking on Bilibili Gaming, two teams that are pretty white hot right now, but Bilibili just a little bit too much for FPX to overcome. I know they've been beating top teams as of late, as they did basically all of last week, but BLG is a little bit of a, they're not a top team, they're the top team in the LPL right now. It's a different kind of challenge, and to FPX's credit, they did put up a fight. Milky Way in particular is just crazy. I mean, this guy's mechanics are insane. I do get a bit of bow from him, and both good and bad statements from that. If you follow my LEC analysis, you'll know that I take that as both a good and a bad thing, but, you know, I think mostly for good right now. The mechanics are shining through. I just hope that he can kind of corral some of that style into giving resources to some of his laners, because I think that, you know, I'm going to have a little bit of a controversial take here, but taking all of the resources as a jungler and basically forcing your laners to play 1v2 for a lot of the game, it makes it a lot harder on them. And these aren't the best laners in the world, and so it might not be a super successful system for FPX moving forward. But let's talk about Bilibili first. Awesome series from this bot lane once again, and this was a no-brainer player of the series for me. It's going to go to On in the support position. Elk obviously got it in the first series, but On definitely deserved it in this one. Whether it was the Blitz or the Rakan, both were terrific, and he really is that dude. Like, he's that kind of playmaker. When he's feeling it, when he is on, pun intended, he is unstoppable. I mean, we've known that for the past year, but he's been really phenomenal for Bilibili so far this year. I think you could maybe make an argument he's actually been the best player on this team so far in 2024, and honestly, I'm going to make that argument. I think he's really been that good, maybe like best support in the world in terms of what he has been showing. Obviously, we'll see if he's going to be able to keep that up for the entirety of a split, but in terms of building upon a lot of the good things that he was able to do last year and a lot of the good things he was able to grow into last year, this is the perfect follow-up to that. It's everything you could have asked for out of a primary playmaker. He sets up everybody on this team. It's not just Elk, it's also Bin, and it's June, and he's everywhere on the map. He's just so explosive, and he changes games. It's very fun to watch the best supports in the world play, because they really do affect the entire map in a way that good supports just don't do at a pro level. It's very impressive, but you do got to give credit to Elk as well. Elk was really good in this series, mostly a recipient of how good On was, especially on the Zeri in Game 2, but you still have to execute on a champion like Zeri, and I complain a lot about TF Bot. I don't think TF Bot is particularly strong. I think TF Top is broken and in a really strong state, but I think you actually take out some of the advantages when you can't as easily move around the map and you don't have that hyper carry that threatens the team fight as much in the bot lane, but that's just my opinion. Elk clearly proved me wrong in this series where he was really strong in game number 1, but really, he was dominant in game 2. That's really the standout game here. And then Bin is the other player that you definitely want to point out. Another good series from him. That's a couple in a row for Bin, and that's a really good thing to see. Hopefully, those regular season performances start to get a bit more consistent. June and Knight taking a backseat, that's phenomenal. Knight was 9-2 and 26 in a supportive role. Again, I don't want to, harp on this too much, but I can't reiterate this enough. Knight is a phenomenal resourceless player. Weak side, mid laner, whatever you want to say. He is really good in that role. He dominated Care in this series, and most of that was just isolated in 1v1. So credit to Bilibili, they went across the map. It's just kind of what they do. And then for FPX on the other side, again, Milky Way is really talented, and I don't want anything that I say the rest of this segment to take away from how good Milky Way is, because I think really a lot of the flaws that I'm going to say in terms of Milky Way are only because he's not on a very good team, and this style would work better on a team that I think had more talent around him, but because he's on a team where the laners don't survive as consistently on their own, it does become a bit more problematic that he is so resource heavy and that he is somebody that really isn't going to be super lane focused in terms of where he's going to generate his leads. Again, that can really work on teams where you have really reliable laners that can get their own advantages, that don't need a lot of resources, that can survive isolated in those matchups, but that's just not how FPX is built, and we're seeing that kind of crumble apart right now. Care is going to get dud of the series in the mid lane. This was awful, and Care honestly has taken not 1 or 2 steps back, 17 steps back this split. All the good progress that he was making from 2022 to 2023, where it was this guy settled in as a top 10, top 8-ish mid laner in the LPL, a solid starter, somebody you feel good about, to oh my god, this guy's bad. And I don't really know where it's come from. I know mid lane has gotten better in the LPL, so perhaps it's just tougher competition, but Care has been miserable this split. Not as bad as some other players, he's not worst player in the league or anything, but he's not been good, and it's certainly been shocking how bad he was. I think Dectum and Life weren't good. Dectum has not been perfect across this split. He certainly had his ups and downs, but Life is somebody that I have defended a lot on this channel. He's somebody who I think gets significantly too much hate because he played bad last year and not because he's playing bad this year. If you just study Life's tape from 2024, I think a lot of people would actually be super surprised with how well he has been playing for this team. In my opinion, it's been him and Milky Way as the two players that have been pushing this team forward. Dectum at times when he's given resources, but he's also not very good when he's left alone on an island, as we saw in this series. But both of them had to go into Elkanon, who are in ridiculous form right now, and they were just not going to be able to stand up to that. It's not like Zhao Lao who's going to be able to beat Ben. He's not that kind of player. So FPX just kind of fall apart. It really is up to Milky Way to carry games, not only because he's the best player on the team, but because that's how Milky Way plays the game, is he's going to take all the resources and he's either going to win you the game or lose you the game. If he does want to become a more well-rounded player that wins a bit more consistently, I would expect his playstyle to need to change, very similar to the things I said about Bo coming out of Vitality and going into K-Corp this year in the LEC. I think he's obviously talented enough to make that adjustment, but it just hasn't been made yet, so it's to be determined. But FPX is still a very interesting team nonetheless. And then for Bilibili, this bot lane's on fire. June and Knight are the secondary pieces on this team, and that's how good they are. Bin's in the top lane, maybe the best top laner in the world. Bilibili's ridiculous. They're 10-1, maybe the best team in the world at the current moment. It's not a shock that they were able to win this series. I know FPX has been hot, but Bilibili is not a team that's going to go down to a flash in the pan, at least at the current moment, like FPX is. And then moving on to our third series of day number 4, and it's another clash of probable playoff teams. Top Esports taking on, oh my god, OMG, and Top Esports is going to pick up the 2-0 win. Again, not an upset here, but it is a demolition. This is TES coming out and making a statement in week number 6. They were really good in both of the series that they played this week, and they needed to be to rebound after that loss to FPX that they did not want to have at the end of last week. But for OMG on the other side, this is who they've become. They're a team that consistently is able to win 2-1 against teams that are kind of around them or a little bit worse than them in terms of the standings, and then get absolutely floored by the best teams in the league. That's just kind of who they are. They are not going to be a team that contests for the title, but they are likely going to be good enough to be a playoff team, and that's just kind of what they've become in their new iteration. So we'll talk about that when we get there. But for Top Esports, player of the series once again is going to go to Mako in the support position. He is thriving on Top Esports right now. I mean, it is truly exceptional, the League of Legends that he has been playing on these engagers in particular. 2 games of Nautilus that he was just able to take over. Whether you want to give more credit to him or to Tion, who I think also deserves player of the series here, I think that's more up to you. Both of them were ridiculously good in both of their series this week. I would argue that they have very much become like the two most important players to TES, not discounting 369. I think 369 is phenomenal, and honestly, he deserves to be in that conversation as well. But it's crazy that Cream and JackieLove are the two that we're talking about the least in terms of game-breaking takeover plays, in terms of how this roster is constructed. That's just how good the rest of this team has been. Mako in particular. He is on pace to be all-pro, you know, first or second team, like MVP candidate level support. This has arguably been the second best bot lane, third best bot lane in the LPL, not arguably, inarguably top 3, but somewhere in that category in the LPL, and that's ridiculous when you have Elk and On who have been playing out of their minds, and Ruler and Missing who have been playing at a super high level to contend with. That's how good Mako and JackieLove have been, and I think Mako in particular has really staked his claim to really reclaiming the title of, you know, best support in the LPL that he lost last year. I think there's really going to be a more of an argument after this split with how he has played. But again, credit to Tion. You know, Reddit's not going to give it to him because they hate him and they scapegoat him, but he was awesome in this series. He's been awesome all year long. He was really good last year too, and he's kind of built upon that, I think, to get even more consistent. It's on picks that you wouldn't expect. I mean, Jackson to Kha'Zix can be a good matchup. You know, obviously it's not particularly, you know, easy for the Kha'Zix to be able to kill you in 2 milliseconds, but at the same time, Jax does take a little bit of time to get online, and so Tion needed to play the early game a little bit smarter when you go into Tristana Rakan in the bot lane or things like that. But Tion, I think, just has such a smart idea for how he wants to path in these games, and, you know, the Lee Sin was more of a testament, I think, to that in game number 2, but generally, it's just really good stuff from TES. I think they play around their carries well. 369 continues to body everybody that he's going up against, even if Cube is not playing well right now, and Cream and JackieLove were really good in that same vein. Like, I talk about them the least, but it's not like they're playing poor. Again, Cream has over-exceeded my expectations, and JackieLove has just been kind of the consistent, you know, flashy carry, which is not JackieLove. It's like the opposite of JackieLove. So very interesting what TES is doing right now, but it's very much working. And then for OMG on the other side, you know, they're fine. Again, I'm not going to freak out about this. I wish that there were parts of this team that were better, but they're just simply not. I like Zhao Fang, and again, he was the spark of life for this team when he was playing Ka, when he was playing Xin. He was the spark that was trying to light the fire to keep them in the game. It just wasn't enough. Angel has been phenomenal this split, but he's going into a team that has a lot of pressure through the middle of the map, and he's playing Ahri and Karma, and he's not going to be able to solo carry games, and he's allowed bad games here or there with how well he has played so far this split and how much he did for NIP last year as well. It's been the other 3 pieces. Cube has definitely been a part of that, but we saw that coming into the season. He was really bad. I wouldn't say really bad. He was pretty bad for WE last year, and certainly wasn't good before he left Rare Atom either, and I think Abel and PP are really the ones that you have to be upset about or surprised about. Abel's going to get dud of the series, and it's become a regular occurrence for him. It feels like everybody from that OMG team last year, except for Cream, has really kind of underperformed so far this year. Abel has taken some major steps back. I've never been ridiculously high on Abel. I've actually gotten some criticism in the past for keeping him out of like my top 580 carries last year, and I didn't think he was necessarily in that conversation, but at the very least, he should have been around there, right? Like somewhere in the vicinity. He's just not been so far this year. He's not winning lane, and he's not doing anything with resources, and PP God's a big reason for that too. He's having a down year. This honestly reminds me so much of that 1 year that PP God spent on Bilibili Gaming when he got to play with Doggo and Uzi and that super team that they kind of assembled, and it just didn't work out. He looked pretty bad. He had to go back to Victory 5 in order to get his confidence back. It feels very similar this year on OMG. I don't really know what the fix is, but if this bot lane is bad, it doesn't really matter that jungle mid are actually pretty decent, because they're not going to be able to win against the best teams in the league. Like Zhao Fang and Angel are just not those kinds of players, and you know, you're not going to be able to consistently dominate the bottom tier teams either. This is just an okay team, and one that I'm not particularly excited about. But for TES, I'm super excited about them. I just need them to get consistent. It's always been the problem with this org. It's always been the problem with some of these players. If we can go into playoffs feeling good about TES, and then they can actually live up to that expectation, then that's going to be a miracle here for them. And now moving on to day number 5, our penultimate day in week number 6 here, and we kicked it off with probably a battle of 2 playoff teams once again. Anyone's Legend taking on Invictus Gaming, and IG picks up a big win here, 2-0. Not a particularly big upset, especially with AL not looking good in recent weeks, but this is still really nice to see. It feels like a lot of the positive momentum that IG's been able to generate so far, especially since Leon came into the team, is just continuing to roll as we move along into the split. And that's awesome. I mean, really, the biggest concern that we had with IG was that, okay, well, you're bringing all 5 players back. You make one change in the middle of the split, but the continuity is there. You have a lot more time in practice than all the other teams that you're playing against. Perhaps you're going to run into a situation where the second half, I should say, of your split ends up being a bit more controversial, not as consistent as the first half was. It's kind of what happened to them in spring of last year, and this is already a team that was known to kind of take their foot off the gas. But that's not what's happened at all here. It feels like they've really learned from their mistakes. Not that their schedule has been infinitely hard, but they have really done a good job of keeping the pressure on and playing super fast and super aggressive, not really getting comfortable and trying out different styles. It's really worked for them. Player of the series is going to go to Leon. He has been such a spark for this team ever since entering. It's really been fantastic to watch. I mean, I was really out on Leon by the time he left Rare Atom. By the time, the team wanted to move into a different direction, it was more than justified in terms of the performances he had been putting up in recent years. It really had been since like 2020, 2021, really that third place run with RA, with Fofo on the team, and those two as the dynamic mid-jungle duo. That was the last time where Leon really felt like a game changer, like a game breaker in the jungle, but coming over here to Invictus, he really feels revitalized. This is the best he's played in 4 or so years, and it's really good to see. Nidalee, Brand, a lot of these more aggressive junglers are very in right now. It's very easy to play the more, I guess, in-your-face style, the resource-heavy style that we're seeing from a lot of these other junglers in the league, and Leon, I think, is executing on it well. So good stuff from him. The rest of the team continued to be really good. Wink, in particular, I thought set up a lot of these plays for Leon to make really well, especially in the mid-game. Obviously, credit to Leon for generating those advantages, especially in Game 1 on his own, but without Wink, I think a lot of these games end maybe a little bit later. There are more opportunities for AL to get in, but with the combo of the damage that Leon was able to put out and Wink just consistently engaging, it was pretty difficult for AL to do anything. Cryan was really good in this series. On was really solid once again. You Should Know Me was fine on the top side, definitely better than Harry. It just was a team effort. Everybody looking good, and that's, again, exactly what you want to see. A complete team here from IG. It's not like a couple of the other teams that are around them in the standings. They are very strong from top to bot. Like, they are very good as a unit, and that's what makes them dangerous. And then for AL, again, this just feels like a fraud team. Like, I don't really know what else to tell you. The worrying trend is that the player that I was the most consistent in, or that I felt the most confidence in going into the second half of this year, that I really didn't think was going to fall off or cause this team any problems, was Shanks, and he's not played well this week. I know, obviously, that the competition was a little bit tougher in this series than it was in their first series, but he had a bad week in both of their series, and that's going to be a bit concerning. He needs to win in the mid lane for this team to have any chance of being relevant at all in the playoffs. They had such a strong start with their weaker schedule that they were sitting at 7-3 going into this week, but walking out at 7-5, maybe you're gonna be in a good spot to still make playoffs so long as you don't completely bottle it at the end, but I mean, you got to build some confidence so that when you do get into the playoffs, you actually can do something once you're there. It's all fun and games to get into the first round and then get absolutely destroyed in a best of 5 and not really put up a fight, and everybody forgets he even made it in the first place. I think that's a real concern with this AL team, and Shanks not playing well is a big part of that. He wasn't the worst player on this team or anything, but he was really bad in this series. Krako was worse, though. Don't get it twisted. Dud of the series is pretty easily going to go to him. He had a rough week, and this is just kind of par for the course. He's kind of similar to Pyjamas in the sense that he very much goes back and forth in terms of good week and bad week. He wasn't as much like that in the LCK, but that has very much been his persona and his personality so far in the LPL. I don't know if that's going to continue. He was never really that volatile of a player in the LCK, but if he is going to be this volatile, it's going to limit the upside of AL, because, yeah, he had his good games, and there have been 2 or 3, series, I would say this series, that they just do not win without Krako, but there are also, like, I would say 3 or 4 that they absolutely win if they have almost any other jungler. Like, he really is holding them back, I would say, in a sense, and it's at least worth pointing out, but Harry continues to have taken no developments from last year. I think he's playing the same. Other people say he's been playing worse, but I was always lower on him as a player. He's just not gotten better. Kale had a series where he really couldn't do anything, and Hope wasn't exactly playing aggressive, even though he was definitely better than he was in the first series of the week. AL just looks a little lifeless when they have to play teams that have any sort of fighting spirit, if you will. When Krako's not on, when Shanks is not on, this team is not going to win, and that makes them inherently incredibly volatile. And then, for Invictus on the other side, this is a good team. Again, I still don't think they're a great team. I know IG fans are really wanting to see themselves in the top 4. They're at 8-3. I think they're in 3rd place in the LPL right now or something something like that. I don't think that's necessarily their skill level. I would expect the end of their season, which is very difficult, by the way, the schedule gets harder from here, to be a little bit more challenging. I expect them to finish somewhere around like the 5 to 7 mark, and I think that's still a really good outcome for a team that I did not have major expectations for. They've already outdone them, and honestly, they continue to look good as we get further along into the split. And then moving on to our second series of day number 5 here, and it's another battle between bottom teams this time, kind of flipping the script, if you will, on the last couple series. ThunderTalk Gaming taking on Edward Gaming, and ThunderTalk is going to pick up the 2-0 win. You know, TT had a pretty easy week here, facing the two teams that are the biggest disappointments, I think, for fans this split in RNG and EDG this week, but they still got the job done. They moved to 4-7, and they're not eliminated from playoff contention. That's what makes this a bit interesting, is actually those like 9 to 10 playoff spots are pretty open, especially if teams like AL are going to continue to underperform. OMG didn't exactly look great this week. LNG's not lighting the world on fire. Weibo Gaming just got back up to 500. There are spots open, so ThunderTalk peaking, at least right now in terms of winning percentage, is a pretty good thing, even if it's not necessarily, you know, the best teams that they're beating. Hopefully the confidence that they are building beating these bad teams is sustainable. But for EDG, you know, I was kind of hyping them up, saying they had been getting better, and, you know, these games were okay. Game 1 was okay. Game 2 was not okay, but at the end of the day, like, this is EDG. They're going to have a couple of good performances from some of their players, and then the players that aren't playing well are just going to completely make it unwinnable for them, and they're going to lose. It's just kind of what they've been all year long. But for ThunderTalk on the winning side, Chocho is going to get player of the series. Dominant performance from Chocho, and I think he's been a bit underrated this split. Again, I actually think it's been the mid-support combo that's really been a positive for ThunderTalk. UCal and Chocho have clearly been the two best players on this team for me. Chocho creating a lot of action, being a big engager, but also actually being a lot more proficient at, like, Ashe support than I would have expected from somebody who is known as more of, like, an engager one-trick, if you will. And especially because I think bot lane's not winning, it's really hard to kind of get an idea of how well Chocho is playing, but it's more his out-of-lane stuff that has been impressing me, which I guess is more important in my eyes for the support position. Not that obviously laning isn't important. He was a really good laner in this series, but, you know, if you can make a lot of plays around the map and, you know, get advantages for your mid laner in particular, who is your carry, that to me is going to be a bit more important, and that's kind of been his focal point. But UCal continues to be the resource carry for ThunderTalk in basically every series that they're in. That Talia game 1 really was like a defining UCal game. That's what he has been ever since he's come over here to the LPL, and he's been able to keep it up. This guy's legit. Beishuan actually had a really good week. 1xN, I think, had a really good week, and even if Hoya was garbage in game number 1 on the Aatrox, allowing Ale to almost single-handedly win the game for EDG, it did matter. You had enough opportunities here on the bottom side of the map for ThunderTalk to be able to win it. UCal and Chocho were the two best players in this series, and that's why TT's walking away with a win. But for EDG, again, you know, good performances from Ale, which is not rare at all at this point. He was like 10-0 and something, or 10-2 and like whatever on Camille in game number 1. Some ridiculous scoreline. Was a little bit more inactive on the Jackson game 2. But after not being able to carry that game 1, I understand if he just kind of took the second game off. We already know he's not practicing. We know he's not fully mentally committed to this. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. And I think the Snake is improving. I think that's another positive. Some of the positioning mistakes are still absolutely apparent. He's going to put himself in bad situations more often than you would ever like an AD carry to do so. But at the very least, he's making positive plays, which I think he wasn't at the beginning of his tenure. But it's the other three that just don't seem to be clicking right now. Fisher's going to get done of the series. Was awful here. UCal just obliterated him. Again, UCal's a very good player, and Fisher has just not been able to adapt, but this was a really bad series from him. Vampire, I think, has also been very bad, almost underratedly bad, because I see people continuously trying to hype him up. He has been the worst support in the LPL. I'm very confident in saying that. And then unfortunately for Monkey, who I was a bit excited about last week, it's just not really transitioned well. It was not a good week for him. We'll just say that. So for EDG, again, they continue to just be a bad team, with RA actually looking relatively good in their one series this week. There's a real potential for them to drop back down to number 17 in the power rankings here. And then for ThunderTalk, nice win. You're happy to see that. You're happy to see Chocho and UCal in particular play well, but this team has to continue it against teams that aren't spiraling out of control right now, that aren't in full disaster mode. If they can start beating teams that are closer to that playoff race, like your OMGs, your Anyone's Legends, your LNGs, that's going to matter a lot towards playoff qualification, which again is not out of reach for this team. No matter how disastrous it's felt at times this year for them, they are still in play for that. And then moving on to our third series of day number 5, and it's actually a top team versus bottom team, so not the similarly matched teams that we've been getting recently. It's JD Gaming taking on RNG, and JDG predictably disposes of them very, very cleanly in 2 games. Credit to RNG, this is maybe the best they've looked in a long time, and that's saying something, because this was not a good series from them. They didn't play particularly well, but JDG is a good opponent, and they are a good team, obviously, and they're relatively clean. They could be cleaner. I certainly don't think they're a perfect team, which is why they're not number 1 in my power rankings, but, you know, I think RNG did at least fight back a little bit in this series, which is more than what I could say for them in the previous couple, but for JDG, you know, it's a nice win. You were able to get it. I would have liked to see you play a bit better in this series, but at the end of the day, a win is a win, and you're going to take it. Player of the series for me is once again this week going to go to Kanavi in the jungle. He's been awesome. He truly has been amazing for JDG across this split. Again, it is so ridiculous how similar he is playing to what he was doing last year, and people were obviously rightfully praising him a lot last year. I called him the best jungler in the world. To me, it is very clear that he is still the best jungler in the world, that mantra and that motto is not false, that it has not changed at all in the offseason. He continues to be amazing for them, but obviously the tools around him are very different. Now as a mid laner, that does play for him a bit more. 2 games of Karma to allow him to play Xin Zhao. You have Flandre in the top lane playing Twisted Fate and just dominating lane and really pulling the Yasuo Yone or whatever Breathe was trying to cook up in the top lane out of position, and then Ruler getting super fed on the Smolder because of the Xin Zhao engages and the late game becoming incredibly easy to play out. Obviously, things aren't nearly as difficult for Kanavi as they would be for junglers on other teams, but still, you have to go out there and do it, and Kanavi's been going out there and doing it. I think Missing is the unsung hero of this team right now, though. He's been really good. I don't know if I like him as much as like everybody else does. People swear by him as like the number 1 or number 2 support in the world. He's up there. He's definitely up there for me. I don't know if he's number 1 or 2, but he's certainly in the conversation. I think obviously playing with Ruler in the past couple of years has certainly helped him evolve a lot as a player, and he has been playing a lot smarter ever since the middle of the year last year, I would say. But Ruler just makes things so easy. You get to play with Ruler Smolder, and he gets to dominate the game, get gold from the Xin Zhao, and just kind of snowball the game out of control anyways, and so not particularly difficult. Also, Flandre is back in here in the top lane, and again, 2 games of TF where he was able to destroy Breathe, who is just completely checked out on the other side, and, you know, we can talk about that now. Dud of the series is going to go to Breathe. Yasuo game 1, Yone game 2 as the answers to Twisted Fate. I understand it in concept, but man, when your team is losing and you pick Kai'Sa in the bot lane, maybe don't go with something that is super volatile on the top side of the map that can instantly lose you the game. Like, it's just very weird drafting. It's very weird execution. And Breathe is not playing well. This is like the 4th series in a row that Breathe has just completely run it down, which again is sad because he was the one who won both of their series at the beginning of the year. And outside of that, they don't really have anything else going for them. So now that Breathe is not playing well, I think it's just a disaster for RNG. I think there really isn't a lot of positives to talk about here. Wei has not been good. Tong Yuan actually had a good series. His Wei was doing something here, but again, Yagao was giving up so much pressure and so much tempo in the mid lane to help out Kanavi and to get his jungler super fed that Tong Yuan basically had a free laning phase. And yeah, he took advantage of it, but he's not going to get games that are this easy against other teams. Most teams don't have this playstyle. Most teams aren't going to go out and do what JDG did here, and they still were able to get away with it. And, you know, that's not ideal. LWX's positioning on Kai'Sa is ridiculous. He's often trading 1-for-1, playing it like an assassin. If you want to play Kai'Sa like Nocturne, I guess you can get away with that, but I don't think it's particularly effective, and Ming is just not good. Like, I don't really know what else to tell you. Ming is not good right now. RNG is not good right now. This is not a good team. I've talked about it already this week. This is one of the bottom teams in the league. You can bet that they're going to drop in the power rankings. 13 was too high for them, and that is a crazy thing to say. But for JDG, you know, top 2 continues to be the goal here. Top 1 is obviously the goal, but top 2 is where they should sit right now. Bilibili looks great. They look great. Top Esports look great. They're the best teams in the league. There's really a big gap, I would say, between them and everybody else, but at least JDG, even if they're not the most consistent team in the entire world, is still firmly within that conversation. And that's going to bring us to our final day of LPL action, day number 6 this week. Again, thank you so much for sticking around this long. I know these videos are long, and this one's coming out pretty late. It's about 4:30 in the morning as I'm getting to this one, so I appreciate you guys sticking around for it. But getting into the final day of action, kicking off day 6, it's a matchup between Bilibili Gaming and Rare Adam, where BLG is going to be able to pick up the win. Again, huge shocker, I know. Number 1 versus number 17, and number 1 won? Oh my goodness. It's it's really, there's not a lot to talk about here. It's the better team winning. I might keep this segment relatively short because really how much is there to say? This team continues to look incredible in every single series that they play, and it's really fun to watch. This time, you know, we've been talking about the bot lane, we've been talking about how they were the stars of the show in the previous series that this team played this week, but in this one, it was Knight. It was all Knight's Ahri, and he's going to get player of the series. I think people forget just how good he was in the first couple weeks because he hasn't been the focal point, because he has taken more of a backseat, been more of a, you know, facilitator in the mid lane recently. I think people forget that he was the focal point for the first couple of weeks. Well, June was the focal point, but June and Knight were just tearing up the mid-jungle duo of everybody that they played against, and it wasn't particularly close. Knight is still that guy. If you give him resources, if you give him time, he's going to obliterate you, and you can't give him Ahri. Like, that's got to be, like, mission number one against Knight is anything but Ahri. This guy's, like, 21-0 on Ahri or something in pro. Something ridiculous. I'm sure you guys will let me know down in the comments, but it's something absolutely ludicrous. Like, he is just unbeatable on this champion. He pops off on every single game that he plays this champion. It's really fun to watch, and it's not to say the rest of the team didn't do anything, but rather that's how good Knight was, that he is the talking point of what this team was able to do here. But again, credit to the bot lane. I know it's getting annoying because Elkanon are just that good, but yeah, they're that good. TF, Smolder, Rakan, Nautilus, it doesn't matter what these guys play. It honestly doesn't even matter what the enemy plays either. Even with a ridiculous amount of ADC bans, all that's going to happen is Elka's going to show up and he's going to dominate the game and he's going to leave and it's going to be easy and Assume's going to have to play Jinx and the game is over and it's crazy. Elk is awesome. On was terrific once again, specifically on the Rakan in game number 1 where, you know, his playmaking ability is basically second to none in the world. It truly is ridiculous. June was really good in the jungle, mega gapped Nayu. Bin was really good in the top lane, mega gapped Xiaoshu. It's just too much. Like, Bilibili is way better than Rare Adam, and it showed here. For RA, you know, obviously you love that you picked up a win earlier this week, but, I mean, come on, did you expect a win here? Did you even expect to be relevant in this series? You probably shouldn't have been, or you shouldn't have expected that, because you weren't. You were never going to be. Dud of the series, honestly, all of them, basically everyone except Assume, and that's because he got banned into Infinity and had to play Jinx and still kind of survived, but, you know, I'm going to give it to Vikla, because what the hell was that Talia in game number 2? It's very funny. The moment Vikla starts playing okay again and being somebody that is actually starting to generate tempo for Rare Adam, this team's starting to get on the right track. Then he goes out and has this series against Knight where he just is a disaster in everybody's opinions. Like, well, yeah, he was bad at the beginning of the year and he's bad now. That must mean he was bad all the way through. Not defending Vikla because he has been bad this split, but I don't even know if he's been the worst mid laner. I think Fisher or Care, like, those are real options, but Vikla's certainly in the conversation, and the Talia game in game 2 is all the proof you need in order to figure that out. Nayu was also horrendous going into Shun. Again, what a letdown Nayu has been. I was so hyped to see him at the LPL level, and it's just been nothing but bad game after bad game. He doesn't seem to be ready for this level, and if that's going to be the case, that's going to be the case. Zora was not good. Zora's been a miserable LPL player. Basically, at every stop, he wasn't good last year for AL. He wasn't good 2 years ago for RA. Now he's not good for RA this year. I mean, Xiaoshu, again, is, like I said earlier this week, has taken a major step back, in my opinion. Things are just a disaster for RA. This is not a good team. But again, it's Bilibili. At least they won earlier this week against a team that was a bit more of an impressive win. You're not going to freak out about losing to the number 1 team. I guess you just wish perhaps they did it in more, I guess, or less dominant fashion. Perhaps they put up more of a fight. That would have been better. But for BLG, nice win. Knight getting some, you know, confidence back, some of that rep that he had lost, because people love to shit on Knight and forget how good he is, and so it's nice of him to remind them every so often. But this team's dominant. Elkanon are the best bot lane in the LPL right now. Knight is the best mid laner in the LPL right now. Shun was the best jungler for a lot of this year, and, you know, Bin's dominant in the top lane. Bilibili's going to be so difficult to stop. It doesn't matter who they're going up against. And then moving on to our second series of day number 6 here, and again, top team, bottom team, not a particularly investive series. It's Ultra Prime taking on Top Esports, and TES is gonna pick up another 2-0. I believe that's a 6-0 week for TES, and that's pretty darn good after really failing to capture a lot of the magic that they had in the middle of the split last week. Even in their loss, if they had looked competitive in that loss, I would have felt a bit better, but obviously FPX was white hot, Milky Way was playing incredibly well, and so there's reason to not be entirely worried about it, but TES has bounced back so well in week number 6 that really really, there is no reason to worry about it. That is definitely clear at this point. For Ultra Prime, this team is just bad. There's really nothing else I can say at this point. There's really not a lot of analysis that I can give you. Ultra Prime is not a particularly good team. They've made things interesting because their early game macro was solid. Hacker knows where he's supposed to be, and honestly, he's having a pretty good split, all things considered, but they just don't have enough talent to actually be able to compete with any team of actual relevance in the LPL right now. So let's talk about it. Player of the series is going to go to Cream in the mid lane. Yeah, another dominant mid lane performance. Back-to-back here, we get Knight and then Cream on day number 6. Really good stuff. I'm really excited to see Cream kind of come into his own on this TES team. The problem has never really been the upside, and in fact, Cream was one of the first channel darlings on this channel. If you guys remember back to like 2020 or around the pandemic era, I was really high when he first broke into OMG's team through their youth academy, through a lot of his assassin play mostly, but, you know, he really kind of became a player that I was interested in seeing kind of explode and become one of the more interesting mid laners in the world. Never really happened, or it hasn't happened up until this point. The consistency has always been the thing that is holding him back. It's not that the good performances aren't good enough, it's that the bad performances are just a little bit too bad for him to be one of the best mid laners, but he has been really consistent in the middle part of this split, and this series was really great from him. Uakai is a good player, and he got to play Akali and Hui, and he got to play some of the champions that he is a bit more known for in the laning phase, and Cream actually just played him better, and that was really, really, really good to see. So big ups to Cream. Tian also had a phenomenal week. There's only so much I can say about him. We already talked about him at length in the first 2 series. It's crazy that he played the way that he did in all 3 of these series, and he didn't get a single player of the series for me. It feels almost blasphemous to say that, but Tian was amazing across this whole week. On the Viego, on the Lee Sin, whatever you really need him to do, he was able to do it, specifically on that Lee Sin in game number 2, where he did just dominate. 369 obliterated Decade, who is particularly shocked, and Jackie Love and Mako are awesome. They're playing at a super high level. In my opinion, the second best bot lane in the LPL right now, only behind Elk and On. I think Ruler and Missing have been very good, but I think Jackie Love and Mako have honestly been better. Maybe that's a hot take. I don't actually know if that's a hot take, but it's certainly one that I feel right now. TES is just playing at a super high level. Again, so nice to see this team play with confidence and to get a lot of that back from last week. I was really concerned that they were going to take that loss to heart. Hasn't seemed to have happened, so really good stuff from them. And then for Ultra Prime, again, there's only so much I can say. It's the exact same story that we've been saying about this team for like 3 weeks in a row now. It's Hacker actually making some plays. It's Uakai getting some gold on him. And honestly, in this series, it was Doggo doing some interesting things, even if the Kai'Sa was really bad in game 1. The Zeri was much more relevant in the second game. It's just the other pieces that they can't put together. They're not good enough to be able to get past their early game. Their mid game is atrocious, and Decade cannot play in the top lane. He's going to get done of the series yet again here. I mean, really, what else is there to say? I can say with confidence at this point, without parallel, he is the worst player in the LPL at the current moment. It's giving me huge Bew in the top lane vibes for WE, where you just have this team that maybe they wouldn't be good without him, right? Like, it's not like Decade is the only thing holding this team back, but he is such a poster child for why this team is struggling and just not being able to survive on the top side of that map that it's becoming a huge issue. Decade is just not good enough. They have to look in a different direction. I know they've signed another top laner. We know that somebody else is on this roster. You have to give someone else a shot here. Even if for Decade's sake, send him back down to the LDL, let him get his confidence back, but he is getting roasted at this level. It's just not good enough. And again, even if Hacker and Uakai are interesting, even if Doggo had a good series, Dway has very much regressed. He has not been particularly good in the last, like, month. Ever since Lunar New Year came back, he has been one of the worst supports in the LPL. It's just sad. It's a lot of the good things that we were talking about with Ultra Prime. It just means nothing. They're not good enough in order for this team to be relevant, and that's kind of going to be the case for them for the rest of the year. And then for TES, again, top 3 team, right alongside the 2 teams we just talked about. JD Gaming, Bilibili, they're below them. I want to make that clear. They're not on the same level. They're a little bit more inconsistent, and I do have real concerns about them. But they're a team that could break into that top 2 if everything went right. I really want to see this team continue to play the way that they did this week, with confidence, with aggression, and with control. This is the best version of top esports that we've seen. It's not really about that, though. It's about whether or not that's sustainable. And that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here in week number 6, and it's actually a really important and interesting clash, as we saw Team WE taking on Weibo Gaming, and WE picks up a super important 2-0 series win. Very much worth noting, Prince is back in the bot lane. I've been hearing some things that this was all just because of visa issues in the first place, that Stay was really only playing because Prince couldn't get back in after Lunar New Year. Now, if that's the case and Prince is going to come back in, that opens up a whole new can of worms for how to approach the second half of this split. But, you know, I thought Stay was really good, but mostly for the reason that I thought he played off of Awandi in a much better way. Awandi was playing really kind of passive, and I would say him and Prince were very passive as a bot lane during the beginning part of the split. It was really the only thing that I was complaining about when it came to WE, because the mechanics were really good, especially from the solo laners, but Prince and Awandi were so slow as a bot lane. It's good to see Prince come back in and actually be the Prince that we kind of know. Now, it wasn't perfect. There were moments where he didn't really have to do a whole ton and got helped out a lot. And Awandi was awesome this series, but this is a good indicator that Awandi just needed to get that confidence boost back, and now you can put Prince back in. I think the best version of WE is Awandi playing the way that he did with Stay, but with Prince in the lineup. I think that's the best version of this team that you're going to get, and I think that's what we got in this series. So really good stuff there. Awandi is going to get player of the series. Really amazing stuff, specifically that Blitzcrank game, but he was still a big playmaker on the Bard as well. Again, that confidence just needed to come back. Awandi's never really been somebody I've been very high on. In fact, I've been very low on him over the years, in the sense that I've pretty, unanimously considered him by like 8 to 10 support in the LPL. He's never really risen above that for me. Even in his best days, I think I've always had a little bit of a lower opinion on him as a support, but he'll have good games, and he can be a playmaker, and he's obviously going to be a bit better when he's given a lot of tools to succeed like he was in this series. The Blitz, the Bard, allow him to go out and do stuff. Just let this bot lane play a little bit more free and a little bit more aggressive. Prince was actually weak side, isolated 1v2 for a lot of this series, but the thing about Prince is his mechanics are so good that even against Light and Crisp, who are a World Finals bot lane, he can absolutely survive that 1v2 on a champion like Jhin. He knows how to play safe, he knows how to be in that predicament, and it allows Awandi to be in a much better spot. I actually think this is a really interesting play style. I would love to see them actually play through Prince, because they just weren't doing it at all at the beginning of the split, and I think he's definitely good enough for you to get away with that, but it is what it is. This is the style they wanted to go for now, and it definitely did work. Wayward continues to get a lot of resources on the top side and do really well with them. I see a lot of people complaining. It's like, oh, is Wayward actually good, or is he just getting funneled, and would he be good on other teams? I think Wayward is very good, because there are a lot of top laners, or a lot of players, a lot of laners in any role, in any position in the league that get a lot of resources and do absolutely nothing with it. Wayward is one of those players where if you give him an inch, currently he's taking 17 miles. Like, it is very impressive. You can talk about it as funneling, but 2 ganks to me is not funneling. It's investing in your top lane, and then when Wayward goes and pays that back out, it's very clear to me that that investment is worth it. And even if Hang has not been perfect, he's easily been the weakest member of WE so far this year. He's done enough to understand that playing towards topside is just going to get this team more wins, and Wayward's been awesome. Fofo has also been incredible, and I think people are starting to pick up on that. He's been very consistent, but he was really good last year. Again, he's another player that I think has just been scapegoated a lot over the course of his career. Some of it rightfully so, especially off the Rift, but on the Rift, he's a very consistent mid laner and somebody who is making this team better. This is a very complete WE team. I didn't feel good about putting them at 4 last week, but I feel pretty good about it now. I know they lost earlier this week, but it was to, a really good team in Bilibili. Like, you're not freaking out about that. You're not worried that WE is going to be unable to rebound from that. This really does feel like potentially a top 4 team, which is a Worlds team in the LPL right now, and that's a crazy thing to say. But for Weibo on the other side, just pretty classic Weibo. You look really good in the first series and then just utterly disappoint when the competition actually matters. In the second series, Xiaohao was bad, significantly worse than he was in the first series. Crisp wasn't very good, significantly worse than he was in the first series, but dud of the series was obviously going to go to ZDZ on the top side. Again, Wayward's awesome, and he's really, really playing well right now, but that does not excuse that ZDZ was horrible in lane in both of these games. If you're going to play TF, okay, you can be a little bit worse in lane because you can get out of lane and do stuff there. Even though he didn't and never got to that point, at least the concept is there. But on Camille into Aatrox, you can't get absolutely blasted in the way that he did in game number 2. It's just not a good look. ZDZ has never been a particularly consistent or stable top laner, and that's kind of the problem here, is that you replaced a very inconsistent top laner with an inconsistent inconsistent top laner who's just mechanically worse. And I think that that's going to be a bit of a problem. I get he's got like a friendship and good synergy with Zhao Hao, and they came over from AL together, but it's just not very good. Like, he's not a very good top laner for a Weibo team that wants to be a contender this year. And it's a bit of an issue. Again, Zhao Hao needs to be better, and Crisp needs to be better as well. Zhao, who was not wonderful this week, and he's really not been great this split. But Weibo is falling behind the 8 ball. They're below 500, and we're very close to playoffs. This is a team that is dangerously close to being left out of that top 10, which would be an absolute disaster for them. I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen again. They still got a big win earlier this week, but there are real concerns here, and Weibo needs to address them sooner rather than later. And then, again, for WE, I guess I'm just higher on this team. I think the components make more than the sum of their parts at the current moment. I really like the way this team is constructed. I think a lot of these players are playing at a really high level. And again, I think if you can get Prince in, and you can get that mechanical upside that Prince offers, because he is a better mechanical player than Stay, if you can get him on board with the way Awandi and Hang have been playing the game and playing towards topside, then this team is going to be very difficult to take down, even for some of the better teams in the league. So I'm very excited to see what WE does for the rest of the year. All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL Week 6 overview and analysis video here in the spring split. Up on the screen now, you can see the updated LPL standings after 6 weeks of action. Of course, all the teams on the left are currently in the playoffs. All the teams on the right currently not in the playoffs in terms of how the standings have shaken out. Nothing is entirely decided yet, though. Obviously, a lot of teams can still make it in. In the first column to the right of all of the teams, though, you can see my power ranking. That's all the number listed from number 1 to number 17, where I personally power rank those teams in the rankings. And then, of course, changes how they have changed from last week to this week in those power rankings. So we can go over risers and fallers. 1, 2, 3, 4 staying the same. I feel good about what I changed last week. TES really cementing their spot in the top 3, and WE very much, in my opinion, cementing that top 4 with a Weibo Gaming win. But number 5 is going to be Invictus Gaming. I feel like I can't really deny it any longer. With all the teams around them really struggling to find consistency, it's what IG has actually found. It's really hard to say that they're not definitely better than a lot of the other teams around them. It just kind of is the case. That means Ninjas and Pyjamas fall to 6. They're struggling. FPX fall to 7. I'm not sold on them being a contender at all. And somehow, Weibo Gaming jumps up 2 spots to number 8. I get it, they lost that pivotal series to WE, but I think highly of WE, and they looked very good in their first series of the week, so I don't want to just write them off completely. I'm going to move them to number 8. This is the sign that they should be a playoff team, but, you know, they're not locked in by any means. That means OMG moves down to 9. This is long overdue. They've only been at 7 and 8 in my power rankings because nobody can take that spot, and AL drops to 10. They are dangerously teetering on me not even considering them one of the 10 best teams in the league. This team is not playing well right now, but their record is good enough where they should probably get into the playoffs anyways. LNG stays at 11 because they should be better than this, but LGD and Thunder Talk have been better recently. 12 and 13 are definitely like open spots for LNG to drop down. They could be number 13 by the end of next week. 14 is going to be RNG. They move down to number 14. Again, Thunder Talk also moves up and jumps RNG. And the other jumping is RA over EDG. I know that EDG beat RA, but RA is just a better League of Legends team, and so it's hard for me not to rank RA a little bit higher in the rankings. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Do you agree or disagree with my power rankings? Would love to know you guys' thoughts and feelings on all of these teams. Who am I right on? Who am I wrong on? Would love to know your opinions. But it's time to move into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 6. Player of the week, pretty easy for me. It's going to go to Mako, the support for Top Esports. Loved how he played this week. Top was generally fantastic to watch, and Mako was the biggest part of that. You know, Tion was obviously big for them as well, but I think Mako was definitely the star, and he's kind of been the star for the team so far this year. I mean, 369 perhaps could take that crown as well, but I think Mako has been the best player on TES, and it's really good to see him have this bounce back split after everybody wrote him off on EDG last year when he had bad chemistry with Uzi. But runners up, honorable mentions in week 6 here. Kanavi, pretty easy choice again. You know, 2 series where he dominated, 3 games where he really popped off in particular. Really good week from him. And then Elk, another really good week for Bilibili, and Elk was the biggest part of that in my opinion. But those are my runners up, my honorable mentions, and then dud of the week for me, Decade, the top winner for Ultra Prime. Somehow, someway, this is the first dud of the week that he's gotten so far this year. With how I've talked about him on the channel, that honestly does surprise me. He's been in the running, I think, a couple of times, but he gets it here in week 6. I can pretty confidently say that I feel like he is the worst player in the LPL at the current moment. Again, I feel bad for him. I think he needs to go back down to the LDL to get some confidence back, because the way he is playing right now, it's just a disaster for Ultra Prime and for himself. So, dud of the week is Decade. Player of the week is Mako, but that's gonna do it. If you guys did enjoy, let me know down in the comment section below. Leave a like on this video. It really does mean a lot. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only cover the LPL on this channel. We cover all 4 of the major regions. That's LCS, LEC, LCK, and LPL, as well as the NACL Tier 2 over in North America every single week on this channel. So if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.